depots, arsenals, different things that have been around since World War II that are really strategic depth to the U.S. Army. They do MRO for us and production of a number of munitions and things. But candidly, we have some issues there. So we're modernizing that in addition to the other end of the spectrum, as the Vice just talked about. The second is the defense industrial base, and how do we revitalize small companies and mid-sized companies, and how do we change some of the business practices that from the government side have been allowed to have been allowed to occur in industry because of our decades of acquisition practices. So then we're going into acquisition reform, and then our installations, our bases, energy revitalization on those, because that's where we not only train there, our families live there, but we project power from those. And then we'll meet that operational side in the middle. And when you lay all of that out, I see it as that's the Army kill chain. And when we say the word kill chain, a lot of times it's focused on the operational things to bring munitions onto an adversary. But it goes all the way back to those factories. And so the continuous transformation that is occurring on the operational side has to occur on the business side.
Do you think there's been an uptick in interest on that supply chain, on that back-end side, on the factory side of the conversation versus the foxhole versus the frontline fighting?
You're saying uptick in visibility on the supply chain?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, and in my conversations with a lot of you from industry and my industry background before this, that's probably the number one vulnerability. And so as we look across that entire kill chain, we have to identify what are the vulnerabilities, operational, business side, et cetera. And in the defense industrial base, that's probably the critical minerals, and we have ways that we're going to try to address that. I think the Secretary talked to some about it yesterday, and the supply chain. Making sure that it's not only resilient and that we can scale up when we need to, but also is it domestic or from reliable foreign partners.
General, anything to add about the enterprise side?
I guess the one piece, so supply chain, critical to what we're doing, but it's more important, I mean, it's not just about new stuff. It's about sustaining the things that we have in our formation today. Chris Mohan, I don't know if he's in here, he's running around the halls, but they have developed an automated AI-enabled software application called Weapons 360, where he can look at every part, every supply chain, deep into that supply chain, where are the hiccups. He can tell you the one tank out of 1,700 in our Army that has had the most downtime over the last 2 years. Why? What part is it tied to? Who makes it? Where's it at? And if we can't get it in a reasonable time, if we have the tech data, which you heard the Secretary talk about yesterday, can we advance manufacture that so we can get that piece up and going? So it's not just on the procurement side, but it's also on the sustainment, just equally as important.
Coming back to you, Mr. Overdahl, lots of talk these days about the Valley of Death and fixing procurement. You were on the industry side, so I imagine you have seen that. How are you seeing in the Army the trying and buying methods changing, and will it actually stick this time?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between the years-long development of exquisite weapon systems, aircraft and vehicles, and some of the more everyday things and smaller items that the Army buys. And in there, we can put those into units like transformation and contact very quickly, allow soldiers to iterate on them, bring them back. And so in many cases in the past, it was develop a system. The second option was to modify a COTS system, and the third was to buy COTS. Invert that. So in every case, we should try to buy commercially available products, then modify them. And our last line of resort is to develop a system from the ground up. When it comes to a lot of these things come from the small companies, and you see them on the fringes, if they can afford a booth of AUSA. How do we address that? I think there's a couple different ways. We talked about Fuse yesterday. The Secretary injected that, hey, we're putting $750 million. I think we're upping that by about $15 million next year. In order for us to, through X-Tech, determine what companies have viable products and interesting IP that they can bring to solve some of the problems. We can provide some of the capital, and allow them to continue to develop and then potentially produce at a larger scale than they are right now. The second part of that is introducing them to private capital and outside capital. So we have a forum that as they come in and pitch things, there is outside investment that's there to take a look. We have to continue to encourage, and I firmly believe this, and I saw this from my time on the outside, we have to absolutely encourage external capital investment in the defense technology industry. And we need to show some pilot programs that will return for them what they would otherwise return in the commercial market and encourage that continued investment. We then can go into all of the acquisition reform type things that we're doing that also override all the things I talked about.
And to your point about Fuse, right, we're seeing the Army lean pretty heavily into this VC style approach. Have you heard anything initially from the industry you're talking to about if they like it, if they don't like it, what's good, what's bad, what's ugly?
Yeah, not necessarily for Fuse itself. I think when we talk to private capital, their concern is demand signal. How are we managing risk in our portfolio if we don't have any demand signal from you? It's interesting technology, but it's not in the Army program. We've got some things that we're going to try to do to allow us to shift around, and that goes to the term agile funding. And you can call it agile funding or the more technical term of line item consolidation. And this is something that we're working on with Congress. We're asking for about 1.5% of our budget for the critical things that develop very quickly. UAS, counter-UAS, and electronic warfare. That's it. Now, if we can show that with Congress, they can still have the same visibility, we have accountability over the funds that we're expending, I think we can expand that portfolio in the long run.
General Mingus, how do these initiatives, what's the payoff for the soldier at the end of it? How are you seeing that affect the average Joe?
Well, as you heard the Secretary yesterday, this is all about the soldier. This is ensuring that our troopers out there in the field have the right doctrine, the right organizational design, the right leaders, the right training, the right facilities, and the right equipment put together in a meaningful way so that, God forbid, we do have to be called upon to go fight and win. They can actually do that. So you've heard the Chief and the Secretary talk a lot about continuous transformation over the last couple days. Inside of that is TIC, or Transformation in Contact, which we've now been doing for over a year, expanding to multiple divisions across all our types of formations that are out there. But an example that I'll provide is how this feedback works. We took our standard infantry brigade combat team design, which we knew for the Indo-Pacific was not light enough, it wasn't agile enough, it wasn't lethal enough, we couldn't move it fast enough, 1,500 pieces of rolling stock. We needed to fundamentally change, and we've got a couple of folks that actually spearheaded this with Division Commander for 10th Mountain and Division Commander, former Tropic Lightning 6, now has the best job in the Army, Marcus Evans. But we infused lethality and mobility and next-gen squad and network and all these drones and counter-drones, infused these formations with all this stuff at volumes and quantities that were probably greater than we originally thought. Because we can sit in here under white lights, either in a building like this or the Pentagon, and ask ourselves, how many drones does a brigade combat team need? Is it 80? Is it 100? Is it 200? 300? We probably don't know that answer. We want soldiers to tell us what that answer is. We want them to inform us, okay, at this point we have saturated our ability to employ it, and we've saturated our ability to actually use the information that's coming back. And through that iterative process, they're going to tell us it's 382. It's 225 infantry squad vehicles. It's X number of this. We were able to take that in the course of a year, a process that normally takes 3 to 5 years, and go from an IBC design or infantry brigade combat team design to the mobile brigade combat team design, all the way through E-date, updated FTU, and approved force design update with an MTO in less than a year. And so that's how soldiers helped us move at a speed which we have never seen before.
I'd like to highlight something Vice said, and by the way, I spend more time with him than my family. We agree on everything with the exception of hairstyle, and that's it. But our only
I see a lot of baldness in the audience.
He keeps trying to get me to do it. I'm not going to do it. But
I'm not doing it.
Yeah, we know you are, Colin. We know.
Do it, Colin.
I got you.
There we go.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
To that point, how many drones do we need? We don't know. Only soldiers know. Special Operations Command has been using the soldier, product manager, industry, and financial folks all together in one place to really drive that requirement very quickly. And in my mind, that's really hard to replicate, but the transformation in contact is a way to do that, where soldiers are iterating. And this is what I've asked industry a number of questions yesterday. When they're out there, do you have teams on the ground, in the field? And the answer is continuously, yes, we do. We're right next to the soldiers. Because what we don't want is a soldier to iterate on something, give feedback, it goes through the process, and 6 months later, a watered-down version comes back to industry. It's not effective. So we've got to have them side by side. And I think that we can continue to do that at a larger scale.
And not to drag this out, but that number I threw out there, and 382 isn't the number. It's pretty close, but that number may be right this year, but it's going to be different next year, and it's going to be different the year after that, because newer stuff is coming online, better stuff is coming online. Today we are individual operator to individual drone, not that far off, and as Next Gen C2 comes online, one operator, dozens if not hundreds of drones, and those drones will be sensors, there'll be jammers, there'll be kinetic, there'll be a full suite of tools that are fully automated, launched, pre-programmed, go out, report back when you have accomplished your mission. And so that day is not that far away either. So that number will change every year, and we want industry to come back and provide that best of breed in tranche buys instead of being stuck with a particular asset for decades and decades.
Is that a repeat thing with TIC, where you go out in the field and soldiers kind of subvert those expectations? Like, to your point, like, oh, you thought you needed 100, but you need 300. Is there a pattern there? Is that repeatedly happening?
I think it has, and it's been different. The reason why and the beauty of doing 3 right up front in that first year is each one of those divisions that did this, 101st, 25th, and 10th Mountain, came back with slightly different solutions. Some of it was environment. Some of it was the places where they were employed. But we continued to come back and dialogue on what that final solution is. But what the chief and the secretary have been very clear of is, just because we decided this is what the MBCT looks like, and I'll go back to the number of drones, it may be different in another year or two. We don't want to stop that learning cycle.
Yeah, there's an analogy that I hear quite regularly because it's in my family circle and it's given to me, is it's the angle of error at a 25-meter target doesn't make that much of a difference. At a 300-meter target, it does. And so if we continuously write programs for years out, we're probably going to be off the mark by the time it gets there. So let's regularly iterate and then change what we're doing as we see the effects.
I want to come back to something you said earlier about the OIB. How do you see its status? What's working, what's not, and what investments are being made to bring it out of World War II, right?
Yeah, and to be totally straightforward, the OIB it's a legacy set of those plants, arsenals, and depots. But it is the strategic depth, and it is an insurance policy for the United States, and it works on the Army Working Capital Fund. We have seen 57% drop in direct labor hours over the past 10 or 15 years, and we can't ignore that. We've seen the OIB producing things that we may not use on the battlefield anymore, or that we're at 10,000% stockpile. I learned that we're producing 11 different colors of smoke grenade, which I was in the Army a long time. I didn't know there were more than 3, but we're producing them. So when you look at what are the things that we should do, and to go back to the Vice's comments about drones, how many? We don't know, but it's a lot, and it's more than we can produce. I think 90% of the domestic drone market is owned by China, so we can't go to that. So let's create our own domestic drone market. Sky Foundry is one of the first pilot programs that General Chris Mohan and the folks at AMC are driving forward, where we're going to produce the bodies, the propellers, all of the things that you can do very easily with additive manufacturing, off-the-shelf parts. The drone body doesn't really matter. The batteries that technology will continue to improve. We're going to be able to make brushless motors next year. And then we bring industry in a partnership where we can experiment with their software, their payloads. That's what really matters in a drone, is not the plastic and metal that goes into it. So Sky Foundry is going to allow us to produce, what's the number that we want to get
When
to?
we get the first one up, it'll be 10,000 a month, and assuming we get the second one built over the course of the next year plus, it'll be 20,000 a month.
How soon is that?
Like I said, we'll be at 10,000 a month by this time next year, if not more.
So to caveat on that, and if you haven't been on the top floor of AUSA where the drone net is, and there's soldiers flying drones, I would encourage all of you, whether or not you're interested in drones, it's the process that's going on. There's 2 soldiers from the 101st Airborne, and they've got a board, a display, where they create 3D, or, well, really not even 3D printed. They just stamp out and cut out carbon fiber and put COTS parts together for quadcopters that the 101st Airborne is using at the CTCs in their own training areas. They can make about 30 a day. All but 2 of the parts are made domestically. I think the 2 parts are made in Taiwan, and they're already looking at how they source those domestically. And they make them for $750. They're cheap, attritable, and they can change the design today based on the feedback from the 101st Airborne soldiers. And they're in the G32 of the staff. So it's not a huge program of record, but they're producing. And that goes to Sky Foundry. Now let's take that and magnify it. Additionally, they're tied in electronically with the same efforts that are going on in the 173rd Airborne and in the folks in Germany that was in an article over the weekend. So they have a shared repository of files and CAD drawings and software so that they can continuously iterate throughout the Army. It's an informal network that we can capitalize on with the OIB.
And General, your thoughts on OIB?
So in the grand scheme of things, we're on a path, 15-year, $18 billion. A lot of folks have heard about the modernization plan for our 23 sites across the organic industrial base. Most of that's tied to automation, robotics. How do you have fewer humans doing things that robots could do? Because in years of plenty, you may want to produce a lot, but then because of the human capital associated with it, when you automate and have robotics, your ability to scale up and down is much more flexible. A lot of this is going into the high-tech side. Critical munitions, precision-guided munitions, drones, as the Ender talked about. But let's not forget that in a high-end conflict, when those critical munitions are done, we're back to clubs and spears and old-fashioned, and mass still matters. So one of the other areas that we have invested greatly over the last year plus, at the start of the conflict in Ukraine, the United States military was producing about 14,000 rounds of 155 a month. Ukraine is consuming over 100,000 rounds a month, so 4,000 to 5,000 rounds a day. You do the math. We grossly underestimated in a lot of our plans that are out there the amount of munitions that it's going to take in a high-end fight. So we have rapidly begun to expand 155 and other lower-end munitions to make sure that the scope and scale is there in time of need as well.
If I can go, let's level up one on the organic industrial base. The Vice talked about the investment that we're making in it. Now, how do we go out and make investment in the organic industrial base attractive to private capital? So yesterday, the Secretary with Secretary of the Treasury brought together probably about $1 trillion of portfolio capital in a room downstairs, in a round table. And what we did is, previous to that session, we laid out for them, here are these sites, whether it's an installation or it's part of the OIB, and what are the things that we can do in a public-private arrangement, whether that's a partnership or it's an enhanced use lease, if it's manufacturing or energetics. For instance, if you are a energetics manufacturer, there's a lot of capital expense that has to go into building a facility to do that. We have many of these facilities now, they're underutilized. We can bring together industry and facilities. There's a lot to work through there, but the opportunity we can't pass up. And we need to make it, we need to incentivize it for them. We have other enhanced use leases, whether that's data centers or warehousing, logistics management, across the millions and millions of acres that exist in the network. And so these are things that we're starting to unpack with private industry that we can bring to the OIB to help revitalize it, in addition to some of the things that the Army's doing internally.
So that's a really interesting conversation, right? You're bringing in Scott Bessent, you're bringing in the Treasury. I guess the first question is why, and then why would private industry buy in? Like, why should they bite that hook?
Yeah, so Treasury's important because of the arrangements that may get put into place between if we invest, they invest, how is that managed, navigating the legal aspects of that. That's where Treasury is, critical to that.
The other thing that I would offer, when most commercial companies are out there that want to stand up a site, a manufacturing site, a storage site, a distribution site, they need land, they need power, they need security. All those things, given the excess capacity that we have across our 23 sites, are very attractive. Chris has been working with about 65 different commercial entities out there, and we think that we're going to have some very attractive partners that want to, and the benefit to us, go into the data center example, build a data center on pick a place. They don't pay rent, but maybe we have access to 20% of the compute store inside that data center for the Army or for the Department of War.
Yeah, and in-kind payments are something that could incentivize. So you have a data center that services a certain part of the commercial industry, and we're allowed to have a portion of that for military use. Critical mineral processing, and this is one that's being talked about a little bit this week, which is all of us, I think, are aware of the rare earth mineral problems, whether it's mining or it's processing. Are those things that we can do that would not only benefit the U.S. economy, but also benefit directly to us from a raw material standpoint?
To get back to your point about transformation, I know this is a bit of a hard pivot, but I wanted to ask this question. How are you measuring success? How are you making sure transformation, modernization, upgrades to the Army doesn't flatline? How are you holding yourself to account to that?
Yeah, we don't want to get ahead of the Office of Secretary of War. They are putting out what is their acquisition modernization plan here at probably early November. We have a lot of things that are going to be nested under that are going to essentially hold officials accountable for the requirements building, experimentation, prototyping, acquisition, and sustainment. They're going to have metrics. Joe Welsh is going to have metrics.
Sorry, Joe.
And he's the right guy for it. So we're going to hold Joe accountable for certain metrics specific to, say, Next Gen C2.
I think if you scale back from that too, what the Secretary and the Chief are trying to do is we're trying to change processes, we're trying to change organizationally, and we're trying to change culture. Normally when you make a big change, you might pick one or two of those, but in this case, they're really trying to get after all three. But process, how many here went to Army Command and General Staff College? Raise your hand if you did. Do you remember that terrible class you took called How the Army Runs? How much of it do you remember? Like none. I know I dumped it immediately upon graduation until I became a one-star and realized that shit was really important. I wish I would have paid attention. There's a book for How the Army Runs that's about this thick. When we split TRADOC and Army Futures Command, we didn't change how the Army runs. It's incredibly complicated. It's cumbersome. It's not intuitive. And it runs the gambit from future OE to concepts to little requirements to big requirements to modeling and simulation and experimentation, refined requirements, hard R's, then updates to back to the .1 PF. Maybe it's a material solution. Then we have the life cycle sustainment. And then eventually there's the sunset. And there's literally dozens and dozens of little micro cylinders inside of each one of those of force design, force development, and force employment. Nobody in the Army, other than maybe a handful, understand how that whole process works, beginning to end. And when you don't understand something, when it's not intuitive, when it's not simple, then you are wed to a process. And we wake up one day and we realize, why are we not fast? Why are we not agile? because the broader how the Army runs needs to be completely revamped. So we took one of the smartest people we have in the Army, Major General Brett Sylvia. We said, hey, you thought you were going to go do something fun. Guess what? We're going to put you in charge of this OPT called How the Army Runs, and you are going to fix it. We brought in a whole bunch of highly qualified experts, people that have worked in this field, and that in addition to the transformation organizationally that we've done and maybe changing how we do budgeting, the budgeting process, but this broader effort, I think, is going to be one of the more transformational things that we do, and it gets after your question, Colin, how do we sustain this? Because if we can get that ingrained and we can come out of on the back end of this thing so it is simple and intuitive, or there's clarity, it'll never be simple, but there's clarity and intuitiveness to it, then I think in the long term, that's going to help the Army be faster and more agile over the long term.
So we've got about 30 minutes. I think we should pivot to some lightning round audience questions. The QR code is up there. Like I said, it should be on the floor in front of you as well. They have arrived at my phone, and I'm going to go through this list real quick. I think this one is for you, General Mingus. As we push for total dominance, how is the Army investing in the human side of modernization, ensuring soldiers are mentally and physically prepared to operate advanced data-driven systems in complex environments?
On the physical side, we had a panel last year. There's a corner this year. Holistic health and fitness is still here. It's still going. It's still an Army program. We are moving as fast as we can to field that to the entire Army. Think mind, body, soul, sleep, nutrition. The days of 5-mile run, push-up set of improvement, and road march every Thursday, those days are gone. We want our kids not to be able to just get to the fight. We want to be able to win the fight, and we want to be able to get home from the fight. We want them to be stronger, more lethal than their adversary. And when you're talking about the adversaries we're talking about, we may have gotten away with less than when you're fighting a squad of Taliban, but it's different when you're fighting a squad of the future. And we want our kids to be absolutely as strong and mentally acute as they can be. So there's the physical. We're at 71 of 91 brigades. We'll be at 111 by the end of this next year, and the entire Army very shortly thereafter, doing 4 different pilots across in the Guard and 4 in the Reserve. They're a little bit different. You know, when you have them 2 days a month, that's great, but what do you do the other 29 days of the month? And so John Stubbs and Bob Harder are doing a couple of pilots on Compo 2, Compo 3 on what does holistic health and fitness look for the Guard and Reserve. Leaders and training. The Chief and Secretary talk all the time about people skills. We cannot underestimate our soldiers of the future are still going to have to be physically fit, tactically sound, masters of the basics and the fundamentals on how to shoot, move, communicate, protect, and sustain. That can never go away. But the integration of all this technology, their job is way harder than it was when Private Mingus came in the Army 44 years ago because of all the other stuff that is coming in to our formations. So data-centric, technologically savvy, how do they bring all this stuff in? Because all the things we talked about, it's not going to be something new every 10 years. It's something new every year. How can they integrate that in a rapid fashion so you still have a cohesive team that can go out there and fight and win? And so people skills, some need to be at a higher level than others, but there needs to be a rudimentary understanding of this baseline tech in every soldier that we have out there. We all had to do employ in place and detonate a claymore as part of expert infantryman's badge or expert soldier badge. Now it's employ a drone. It's employ a network stack. Whatever those tasks and skills are going to be, that's going to be morphed over the next year or two without losing the mastery of the basics and the fundamentals, though.
I was expecting you to say the no-neck Army line.
That was his chance to say no neck.
That was a layup.
Right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard it, we will not have arrived when the Army, when you see your soldiers 10 years from now and we all have no necks, we will have arrived. Our traps are going to go, men, women, all alike, go from the bottom of your to the edge of your shoulder there. That's when you know when H2F has fully been realized inside the Army. And yes, we're going to have to probably go with another uniform. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. He trademarked it. Now, in addition to all those things, right, let's look at how are we injecting talent? How are we taking talented people, giving them the right training, and injecting them back into the force? And a great example of that is in Austin, Texas, with the Army Software Factory. Talented young soldiers of all ranks go in there, 1 year of training, intensive training, additional skill identifier, and then 1 year of utilization, and then back into the force. to be utilized at the needs of the division, the Corps. That's how we help the rest of the soldiers inject that, the technology that we're placing on top of them into their TTPs.
I'm going to stick with you on this one. This person asks, while buying and modifying commercial products to meet Army needs sounds like a simple solution, what are some challenges altering existing systems poses both for industry and the Army?
So I'll take this opportunity to talk about the defense business systems. We had 394, I think, just a few years ago. We're down to just over 200 of them. They don't share data, and that makes our entire system the same that it was that many of us experienced, where you go to in-process someplace and you fill out the same form every place. It's the same information. So what Joe's doing with NextGen C2 and integrated data layer and applications that ride on top that are unique to those users, that's what we have to get to on the enterprise and defense business system side. Incredibly difficult because of the number of cylinderized programs. Adopting COTS is going to solve some of those, but not all of the same softwares that industry uses are going to be capable of managing some of the things that the Army does, so we will have to modify some. But the last resort is develop a new software system. I don't think we should ever have to do that again on the business side.
General Mingus, this question's for you. How has the Army mitigated the recently identified cybersecurity risks, in the NGC2 platform? There was some reporting out there about the memo that was out there.
Yeah. There was some initial challenges when we first wanted to put NextGen C2 at Fort Carson onto the network. My personal opinion is I think it kind of went a little too far, because we were actually, even before the memo was inked, we're able to fix the vast majority, and we are now beyond that. And the full authority to operate NextGen C2 at Fort Carson is there. And so I think we have completely negated any of the concerns that we had that were out there. So my apologies to everybody in terms of how that went down, but I think we are in a good place now. We're in a good place with the 25th out in Hawaii, and we are off to the race. Just sat with Pat Ellis yesterday for about 2 hours, and I know you're comfortable. I think Leo Garcia, our CIO, is comfortable, and we are off to the races on NextGen C2.
I'm going to be a little more direct and candid on that. Writing a memo is not how we're going to do business. That was an easy conversation to pull the right people in, and instead we went back to our old practices of document our grievances or document our issues that we see. That's on the business side of the Army. That's what we have to fix, because those are the old practices that hemmed up what we're trying to do with NextGen C2, what Pat Ellis is doing at Fort Carson. We're going to go right back to the same layer of bureaucracy. It has to be a conversation. That team, the NextGen C2 team, is not Joe Welsh or Pat Ellis. It is the Chief of Staff of the United States Army down to the 4th Infantry Division soldier with a radio. And all of us are on that team. And that's how we have to act.
This person asks, will the timelines of force design, force modernization, and force employment shrink for all systems across the board? Whoever wants to jump on that one.
I think, yes, going back to how the Army runs, I mean, force design fundamentally is also not in the same place that it was, say, when we did division pick a year during the Reagan buildup, or the 90s as we came from 780 down to 480, where force design was, here's how many divisions we need, how many DIVARTIs, how many combat aviation brigades, here's the specific capabilities we need. I mean, there was a lot of detail in force design work before. The main effort now is in the middle portion of force development, the budgeting cycle that goes with it, the agile funding that the Undersecretary talked about to make sure that inside of a budget cycle, you've got the ability, year of execution, to move stuff around so that ultimately you can put stuff in the hands of soldiers at a much more rapid rate than we have. I think, just using a couple of examples between Future Vertical Lift for the MV-75, M1E3, those were on a timeline a couple of years ago, not to field till 30, 31, 32. We're going to have a flying prototype. I just talked to the team downstairs in December 26. So 1 year from right now, we're going to have a flying prototype of MV-72. We're going to have E3s in our tactical formations next summer. Much faster. We're going to have prototypes of the XM30 in our soldiers' hands next summer. So these are all just partnering with industry and how can we accelerate these things. Digital designs. So going back to the XM30, that was 100% digital design before we bent a single piece of metal on our next infantry squad vehicle. Working with the Army Test and Evaluation Command, ATEC, they were able to work out all the kinks in both those prototypes before we ever bent metal. Another example of how this speeds up. And with digital design, does it reduce the amount of testing? When you're talking critical munitions, PRISM, which is our next family of long-range precision fires, the modeling between the digital design and the simulation and the actual live fire was a deviation of less than 1%. So the live fire demonstrations were 99% of what we saw in the sim and the testing and evaluation that was done in the digital space. Another example of how we're going to be able to speed this up. Put all that together, and I do believe that we will be able to, in force development, force employment, move those time horizons much further to the left than we have historically done.
Do you know where the MV-75 prototype's going next year? And I believe the M1E3 is going to Fort Hood, correct?
That is correct. We announced at Quad A this last year, the first unit equipped for the MV-75 will be the 101st. Whether it will be that flying prototype, because anything that flies, you probably want test pilots flying that thing initially, vice traditional. So it's not going to be the first flying frame that goes, but the first unit equipped will be the 101st.
I'm going to stick with you, General. This person asks, as Congress goes into joint conferences for the NDAA and appropriations in the near future, you'll be discussing agile funding and consolidated budget lines for the DoD. It's a two-part question. Can you provide some of your thoughts on how this enables the Army to rapidly deploy and assess technologies at the pace needed in future wars? And who wins this weekend, Tennessee or Alabama?
Rodney, where are you at? We are going to fight as soon as this is over. Tennessee, of course, is going to win this weekend.
I'm a Gamecock, so.
Oh.
Oof.
Now I've completely forgot the question.
About
Agile funding.
Yeah.
So agile funding in the under kind of just the three portfolios we went after this year: UAS, counter UAS, and EW. $200 million in each one of those. About $1 billion, per across the FIDEP or the 5-year planning horizon. We got some of that, but not all of that. Back away. Why is this important? A tactical example. 2 years ago, because we just experienced October 7th. Peace deal in Israel, but shortly after October 7th, 2 years ago, we started getting schwacked in Iraq and Syria every single day. As we were going from Coyote Block 2 to 2+ to 2 Charlie, 2 Charlie was the one that was actually having extreme success against counter UAS in Iraq and Syria. We had to come back in the building because each one of those 2, 2+, and 2 Charlie were an individual funding line. It came back to us in a program element associated with each one of those. Before we could buy a single Block 2 Charlie, we had to do an above threshold reprogramming. It took 45 days, and everybody was patting themselves on the back. This is great. We did it really super fast. That's because normally that's a multi-month kind of process. If you're a kid at Tower 22, you're looking at your watch. Back here, we're looking at calendars. Had that been a single line of accounting, a single program element, we could have immediately gone to procurement and had those Coyote Block 2 Charlie missiles in the hands of those soldiers in days instead of a multi-month period. So going forward, as the leadership, Army senior leadership has talked about this, we did start with those three. But it is our fundamental belief, though, long-term, that anything that from a technological advancement perspective is faster than the traditional budget cycle, should be considered a candidate for agile funding. And here's why. The services typically go pencils down on our budget build in June of any given year. And then you go into this, and so for this year, that we went pencils down for 27. And then we'll go through a series of budget review processes up through the White House, over to Congress, through the fall. And this is for 27. And because 19 out of 21 of the last years we've operated under a continuous resolution, you're not going to see that budget 14 months later on 1 October when it should be passed. you're probably, if you look at the norms over the last 19 years, you're going to see it in March if you get an actual appropriation. Well, what happens in March? You are now in what we call mid-program review because you've had to cash flow and money's not in the right place. You have to go through and do your big omnibus reprogramming. That gets submitted back to Congress because the money's all in the wrong spot. And you might see that money on the second or third week in September, which means now that is 2+ years later when you can, and you get 2 weeks to execute. It's a wonderful way to run a railroad. If you don't have the flexibility to move stuff around in execution, you can't be there when you've programmed that 2 years prior. Think about all the things that have changed in our world just in these last 2 years. So that's why this flexible funding, agile funding, PE compression, budget line item compression is so important, not just to the Army, but the entire department.
If I can expand on that, the relationship with Congress, and the Vice and I are going to spend some time with congressional reps and PSMs later today, is getting them to understand that they will maintain the visibility on this. Because at the end of the day, that's their big concern, and they're responsible to oversee the budget, and we can't ignore that. So how do we do that? Well, number one is I can't explain the problem as eloquently as the Vice just did, but we're really good at fielding capability, and immediately the adversary responds.
Yep.
It counters. Now we have to have a response. I don't know that we plan for that response when we field a capability, because we have to wait for what the countermeasure is. If you look at Ukraine, and I take select lessons away from Ukraine, I don't think it's holistically across our Army, but one-way attack drones. The counter was electronic warfare jamming. The response, very quickly, fiber optic cables. And so if you look at the pictures of the battlefield, it's just strewn with fiber optic cables. How do you counter that? Well, very rapidly, the Ukrainians came up with a simple system of a car battery, a motor, and barbed wire that spins. And as the cable lays across it, it winds it up and it breaks it. That was done in a matter of days to counter the problem. I don't know that we would have a response to that in even weeks. And so it's not about the low-tech solution. Those are our soldiers, frankly, will go out there and figure those things out. It's about explaining to Congress that we have to not only field, but be prepared to respond to the counter. And this is with exquisite weapon systems, that cycle may take years. With other things, it may take months. But with some of the things that our soldiers are going to face on the battlefield, it has to be days or, to the Vice's point, even hours.
What's the lesson we shouldn't take from Ukraine?
We are a maneuver warfare army. Combined arms, and every link in that chain is complementary and relies on the other links in that chain to form one force. What we're watching in Ukraine is positional warfare, and if we as a nation are fighting positional warfare, we've already lost. So a lot of the things that you see, people say, well, the tank is irrelevant because of FPV drones. Yeah, when it's sitting static for days at a time, it is vulnerable. But in our Army, it's part of a combined arms structure that has multiple ways to address the adversary, and it's a maneuver army.
Yeah, and I would offer in a joint environment as well. Yeah. The traditional roles of the land force, the maritime force, the air force, air superiority for the air, maritime superiority for the maritime forces, and we obviously land. A lot of people use the term cross-domain maneuver, all-domain maneuver, but at the end of the day, there are going to be things that the land force can do to help the maritime force by holding maritime targets at risk, holding air targets at risk. The Air Force is going to have to do things to open up windows for the land force to move. Same thing on the maritime. And so the traditional roles, even across joint, combined, all-domain maneuver is not gone, but the methods, the means in which we deliver to support that joint force is going to morph over the coming years.
I think we have time for about 2 questions. This audience member asks, what reforms are being made to the sometimes lengthy ATO process to allow for faster iterations and then deployment of software?
I'll talk about ATO very quickly, and I'm by no means a cybersecurity expert, so bear with me. I think that what we have to do is look at when we generate security requirements for software, are we looking at industry that has very similar requirements? So take the international banking industry. I think they're attacked about 20,000 times an hour, and they still manage to move trillions of dollars every couple of days without appreciable loss. We're going to be attacked at the same rate by a very sophisticated enemy, and we probably are on a regular basis, not to that scale. But what can we learn from international banking that we can then apply to some of our business systems and some of our operational systems?
I guess the only other that is near and dear to everybody is if you take Apple, I mean, they absorb hundreds, if not thousands, of applications, apps every day, and it's a fully automated, fully AI-enabled process. And if you actually go to their headquarters, they've got a big video wall that, you know, it kind of, from an illustration perspective, shows them coming in, going through a little gonculator, and does it pass all the certs and the necessary things that, from a cyber standpoint. And if it passes all that stuff in an automated fashion, it's accepted in it. The human is almost completely out of the loop. And from an ATO perspective, how we do that, we've got to come up with a similar kind of process, and we could probably learn from that.
So as we wrap up here, you know, looking way ahead, where do you all see the greatest opportunities for industry, and how do you see the relationship evolving between Army, industry, buyers, and sellers, and where is their expertise needed the most?
There's no shortage of expertise needed. I would tell you, I think it starts with software, and then it goes into software-defined radios and the end-user devices that the Vice talked about earlier in this session. Those are some of the things that are going to iterate so rapidly that that's where there's a ton of opportunity. On the far end of that are some of the bigger, larger, more complex weapon systems, and I think that we're still going to utilize a lot of the traditional methods to do that, albeit with trying to accelerate. But it's on this end where, you know, traditionally the military was where new technology was developed, and then it was transitioned into the commercial sector. The inverse is true now. So how do you, as the defense industry, bring those unique commercial things that are weeks old to the military to solve problems?
I just offer two thoughts. And before I give those two thoughts, we can't do this alone. Everybody in this room needs to be part of this. We all need to be committed, because my first thing is continuous transformation. It is here to stay. Every day we should get up and know and have a goal to make our Army a little bit better than it was yesterday. And that is really the essence behind continuous transformation. How do we learn, rapidly ingest, make adjustments, whether it's TTPs or doctrine or a material solution, but every single day we need to be committed to making the Army better every single day. The other thing that I would offer kind of long-term is the notion behind, and this is kind of for industry partners that are out there and military audience. So the Germans brought in 1938, 1939, took the tank, the airplane, and the radio, put those three things together, and we now call that today combined arms maneuver, a lot of the discussion we had. That was three pieces of technology. Every modern military in 1938, 1939 had the tank, the radio, and the airplane. But the Germans kind of figured that out first and changed how we fight. Where are we at today? Robotics, AI, high-powered microwaves, high-energy lasers, long-range precision fires, where the land force can now reach out and touch in excess of 4,000 kilometers, the land force, all the way down to innovating at the round and 155 rounds of traditional 22 kilometers to now 30 kilometers. The battlefield geometry, the battlefield architecture, all of that is going to change very, very rapidly. But probably the most profound is what has historically killed soldiers, sailors, airmen, marine, and guardians out there has been direct fire and indirect fire. 80% of what's, and there's good and bad out of Ukraine, but 80% of what's killing people in Ukraine is coming from the air. So the notion behind reimagining what the fires warfighting function looks like, I think is going to be fundamental to the next fight. It's not to say that maneuver is not important, it is. But we all grew up in a world where we looked at the enemy, where's he strong, where's he weak, where am I strong, where am I weak, look at the terrain, what's the mission I've been given, what's his center of gravity, what's the decisive point, and I develop a scheme of maneuver to get at that decisive point, a main effort, await the main effort, and all the supporting efforts that go with it. And that's called a scheme of maneuver. and then you develop a scheme of fires and protection and everything else to execute that scheme of maneuver. When you're dealing with adversaries that work integrated fires complexes, preclusionary tactics, call it A2AD, if you introduce maneuver before you have won the counter C2 fight, the counter recon fight, and the counter fires fight, our maneuver will not be successful. So reimagining what the fires warfighting function is with the convergence of long-range direct fires, indirect fires, long-range precision fires, and integrated air missile defense. And I think defense is even the wrong word to talk about air artillery, into a proactive offensive mindset, getting after those air threats. That is going to be one of the fundamental things that changes for the land force. And it goes back to the joint. That's our value proposition to the air and the maritime side as well. But we will all collectively have to work that together.
Last question. Who ran the 10-miler faster?
We ran at the same speed.
Same speed.
We crossed there you go, right on. We even shared.
I don't know if I believe that.
We shared headphones for the last mile.
Wired?
True
Were they
story.
wired?
Not wired. That would be really weird. But they.
True story, because he was asking me what I was listening to when we first took off, and I told him it was Maynard Ferguson, because I'm a big trumpet fan, and he was a screech trumpet player. And we get to mile 8.5, and on my playlist, yes, I will admit it, ABBA came up. So I quickly ran over to the under. I said, "Here, you got to put this in." He was like, "I'm so." And we just powered through. So we listened to ABBA for the last mile and a half.
Running on air to ABBA. It was fantastic.
Fantastic, guys. Well, I know you guys got to get out of here. Thank you for hanging out with us, and thank you guys for the insights.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate it, man.